Mr. Layton and friends, for many of us who have been brought up within the Christian fold, the theosophical teaching of the existence of perfected human beings, the great Mahatmas, the masters of the wisdom, may not at first be readily acceptable. For we Christians are taught, are we not, that there exists but one perfect being, who is our Lord Jesus Christ. Nevertheless, history does actually record many earlier divine visitations to mankind. Permit me just to refer to some of them. Far back in the very earlier days of Egypt, there the god Tahuti or Tot, associated with the Greeks with their god Hermes. Tahuti appeared somewhere early in Egyptian history as the Lord of creation and the Lord of light, and is said to have taught the ideal of seeking the light and allowing it to shine forth. And one of the symbols of that religion was and still is the serpent-draped sun disk. And then in Persia, Zoroaster traditionally lived during the 7th century BC. Whilst he taught what we know as Theosophia, he accentuated the ideal of purity, pure thoughts, pure words, pure deeds, and took as his symbol the element of fire. Then in early Greece, Orpheus, a legendary hero, especially endowed with the gift of superhuman skill in music and song, conveyed his capacities to the initiates of the Orphic mysteries. In India, the Lord Sri Krishna was and still is deeply worshipped as a divine incarnation. In Sanskrit, avatara, or descent of the divine. He was regarded as a manifestation on earth in human form of the Lord Vishnu, the second aspect of the Hindu Trinity, the deity as preserver. He taught, as we learn from the Lord's Song or Bhagavad Gita, he taught, amongst other things, the virtues of dispassion and devotion. And his great symbol is the flute, the perfect channel for thought and beauty to mankind. Later in India, as you doubtless well know, since we are drawing nearer now to our own times, there appeared the Lord Gautama Buddha, whose date was 563 to 483 BC. He taught evolution to Buddhahood for all men by means of successive lives on earth, lived ideally under the law of cause and effect. His main message was that law, and his symbol, the wheel of birth and death. And that has brought us down to the great being to whom I referred, and of whom we thought together as I began. In Palestine, our Lord Christ appeared and taught to us all, amongst other virtues, the ideal of brotherly love and self-sacrifice. His symbol being, as you well know, the cross itself. Now, as students of the ageless wisdom, we may ask ourselves the question, who were these strange and wonderful beings? Theosophy answers that they were and still are members of the immortal race of the teachers of mankind, perfected men, masters of the wisdom and of life and of death, our subject together this morning. Actually, though, we Christians need not really hesitate to study and even accept the idea of human evolution to perfection. For actually, in both the Old and the New Testaments, there are examples and teachings to this effect. You'll remember perhaps, yes, in the Old Testament, that strange figure, also mentioned in the New, called Melchizedek, and his order of priests, which is said to exist forever. Others were there like Enoch, Elijah, and Moses, referred to in the Old Testament, and remarkable beings, men endowed with superhuman powers. And so it is not really difficult for us to believe that these were highly evolved human beings, perhaps on the very threshold of adeptship. And of course, in the New Testament, one finds at least 4 statements, 4 references, should I say, to the perfectibility of man. Our Lord himself, you will remember, confirmed concerning all mankind that ye shall be perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5, verse 48, according to the Revised Version. And then St. Paul, in his epistle to the Hebrews, said, the spirits of just men made perfect. He also wrote, howbeit we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, and not the wisdom of this world, nor of the princes of this world that come to naught. And finally, St. Paul really would seem to have put forth the whole idea of the evolution of man to perfectedness. Here are his words from Ephesians 4:13. Till we all come. Remember that third word, please. Means so much to me as one student. till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And our Lord's own command supports St. Paul's statement that indeed perfection is the assured destiny of every one of us, of all mankind. For in the Authorized and in the Revised Version, our Lord did say, "Ye shall be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Thus, friends, a close and, ought I to say, dispassionate examination of our own Bible does reveal scriptural support for the two age-old teachings that every human being will one day reach superhumanity. And yes, that such perfect beings, as we'll see directly, do already exist upon our earth. And indeed, the doctrine of the perfectibility of man is universal. Now, what does the ageless wisdom itself say on this subject? May I just put the very central, basic ideas before you, all offered, remember, like everything said from a theosophical platform or book, purely for our consideration and never dogmatically. Well, here are some 9 statements. Man is that being in whom highest spirit, the monad, and lowest matter, our bodies, are united by intellect. Man's spiritual self perpetually unfolds potential capacities, this being the result of his existence. Third, this process of perpetual unfoldment culminates in the attainment of perfected manhood and womanhood, adeptship. Next, the method of human evolution, says Theosophy, is by means of successive lives or rebirth of the spiritual self here on earth. Human experiences, we learn, and human conditions are the results of human conduct under the operation of the law of cause and effect, or in Sanskrit, karma. Simply put, if I may, kindness brings happiness and health. Cruelty brings inevitably disease and misery. Then a very interesting idea is found. The processes of evolution can be delayed, proceed normally, and be hastened. They could be delayed by ignorance of these truths, and so by failure to conduct one's life accordingly. They could proceed normally, the evolutionary process, physical, emotional, and mental life as normally lived. But the whole process, says the ageless wisdom, can be hastened by recognition of the continuance of the mystery tradition which we studied together last Saturday, and, yes, and by the intelligent application to one's own life of its age-old and unchanging rules and laws. Simply put, the kingdom of heaven can be taken by storm. This, of course, which we'll deal with in later lectures if you're interested, this calls for self-training, regular and wisely planned meditation, and selfless service without the slightest thought of reward. And thus living, century by century, a perfect man and woman arises, the rare flowering of the human race. Perfected men and women, adepts, says Theosophy, for our consideration, do exist here upon our earth. Under their inspiration, so it is believed, the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875, as they stated, to popularize a knowledge of Theosophy. In following these ideals of human life and the attainment of the goal of adeptship, two facts, it has seemed to me, must be remembered when considering the idea that all men and all women, all of us, are evolving through successive lives on earth to the stature of perfected manhood or womanhood. And one of these facts, so it seems to me, is that the evolution of man is twofold. First, the interior spiritual self unfolds inherent powers, and the outer man develops them ever more perfectly by experience. First fact, the power is within. The evolutionary process occurs within us. And the outer man, when wise and informed, lives and acts accordingly. The second idea I would like just to put forward is that it's not this present named bodily person who becomes perfect, but the spiritual self, the monad ego, the real immortal self of woman and of man. And remember too that within one's innermost divine nature, from the beginning, there existed the potentiality of attainment, indeed of unending progression. Hence, one of the names of that innermost self, which is the immortal germ. This it is, we are taught, which at the end of age-long evolution attains to human perfection, and thereupon enters the superhuman kingdom of nature. Indeed, Theosophy does teach that adepts actually exist on earth. They are men and women who have evolved through past ages during hundreds of lives like our own. And I suppose at once we ask ourselves the question, Would one recognize an adept if granted the privilege of admission to his presence? How should that be answered? Well, I suppose this recognition would depend upon the extent to which the latent adept power and consciousness had become active and aware in the observer. For, of course, man can only comprehend that without him which at least has begun to be active within him. As Emerson said, as you doubtless know, if ye see no gods, it's because ye harbour none. Others have written, the fool tends to see only the folly in others, the wise man to see their wisdom. Somebody wrote, I can't trace the source. Everything is yellow to the jaundiced eye. So I suppose recognition of a great being, if admitted to his presence, would largely depend upon oneself. They are, nevertheless, so far above men that in attempting to understand them, one must be prepared for the unusual. For the perfected man has reached perfection of both body and spiritual soul. He has, for example, conquered death. He has won immortality, including remarkable longevity of the physical body. Intellectually, he is perpetually illumined. Spiritually, he lives in continual realization of oneness with the eternal, universal life, the ideal which we have been thinking of together. Then the adept has highly developed each of the three aspects of his spiritual self. He is technically omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. His will, for example, is developed to omnipotence, both over his own nature and increasingly over nature herself. How wonderfully that faculty was displayed, wasn't it, by our Lord Christ when he showed his command over the forces of nature in the stilling of a tempest, in the midst of a storm, as also his power of performing so many wonderful miracles. These all illustrate this development of the inner will. But you know that I understand is not individual alone. It depends also upon surrendered self-will in conscious unity with the one divine will. And it's this which gives to the adept his remarkable power. And so again, our Lord Christ, praying in Gethsemane, expressed this surrender: not my will, but thine be done, O Lord. Then again, the adept's wisdom and universal love are developed to an extent of almost omnipresence. Each adept, male or female, is an embodiment, shall I put it, of divine love. And his spiritual intuitiveness is fully unfolded, used freely, just as we mortals use our five senses and our formal mind in order to gain information. So the adepts are great lovers of humanity. Spiritually, they are ever near mankind as incarnations of divine compassion. I move there to add, yes, and ever are they seeking those who will collaborate with them. And this doorway to their presence also is ever open to the one who with selfless heart, like them, will become filled with love for their fellow men, serve as best they can, and in the Master's power and name. And then again, the intellect, in its turn, is developed to virtual omniscience. I don't think that means that the mind of a master of the wisdom contains all the time within it all knowledge, but that he has access to it without the necessity for painstaking scientific research. You see, friends, the adept knows the formulae, the principles, and the archetypes of creation. And so he possesses what our Lord gave to St. Peter, the keys of knowledge. And furthermore, of course, I mustn't omit, furthermore, the adept mind is one with the mind of God. In this matter, a great master is said to have written these words: "Believe me, there comes a moment in the life of an adept when the hardships he has passed through are 1,000-fold rewarded. In order to acquire further knowledge, he has no more to go through a minute and slow process of investigation and comparison of various objects, but, wonderful phrase, but is accorded an instantaneous, implicit insight into every first truth. Omnipotent will, omnipresent wisdom, all-knowing intelligence. Such are characteristics, it would appear, of the perfected human being. Then again, since we are studying this subject, the adept has developed to a very high degree the faculties of each of the 7 attributes of human nature, called in some theosophical books the 7 rays. And so the adept, you could say, is perfect as leader, as teacher, as philosopher, as artist, scientist, physical and superphysical, and as devotee, together with a highly developed understanding and mastery of spiritual, occult forces in nature, and yes, in functioning with them and controlling them by means of ceremonial orders. Every adept is fully capable of effective activity in each of these 7 ways. Remember, leader, teacher, philosopher, artist, wasn't it? Artist, scientist, devotee, and master, planetary and solar ceremonialist. But remember, his body should with us be so privileged. His body is but a mere vesture, assumed and discarded at will, because the adept has also developed all the yogic powers called siddhi. For instance, he or she can travel at will in the superphysical body, can project and use consciousness at superphysical levels without leaving the physical body. He can materialize at a distance his or her physical body, produce objects phenomenally by means of his highly evolved will. He can be aware at a distance merely by focusing his attention at that place, and if necessary, is able to act and inspire others at a distance. Every adept, we are assured, is able to communicate mentally with others over the entire earth, and I would assume throughout the solar system, but all according to degrees of development. And as I think I said earlier, a master of the wisdom who decides to keep a physical body knows how to preserve the physical body in youthful maturity and unusual longevity. So that if you saw a master 80, 90 years ago, and then again today, there would be no change. And in addition, the adept has that wonderful power of shedding light into the minds of men. But, as I did say in passing just now, all adepts do not wear bodies. Some follow the pathway into which I cannot go now, which leads them away from purely physical manifestation into ministrations and collaboration with the one mind in the inner realms of nature. But those who do retain physical bodies are said to live in retreat for the better fulfillment of their duties to the great brotherhood of the adepts and its evolving life. Some of the places, at least, or should I say, some of the countries and areas where their ashrams are, have become known to us during the last 75 years or more through theosophical literature. Also, yes, the names of certain sages have become known, particularly if you travel in India. Amongst these, for example, are the adept regent of India, who has this name. May sound strange to you, friends. The Rishi Agastya, the Rishi adept of India. The Lord Maitreya, the great world teacher of this age, and such sages as, strange sounding words, friends, such sages as Nagarjuna and Ramanujacharya, great adepts. But occult tradition tells us that adepts are living in the Nilgiri hills, in the Himalayas, still even in the far north of Tibet perhaps, in China, in Egypt, in Transylvania. Our minds at once begin to ask, what about America? And the memory came to me then, yes. There is said to be a gathering in Yucatan, known as the Yucatan Brotherhood. China has its adept regent, who lives physically in retreat in the interior of China. And Chinese tradition places his residence in the interior mountainous country of China. In Egypt, interestingly enough, there is said still to remain a group of adepts living there, apparently, a branch of the Great Brotherhood, sometimes known as the Brotherhood of Luxor, possibly referring to the locality from which they work and where now they live. Other parts of the world? Oh yes, as I said just now, in Transylvania, which in olden days was Hungary, the adept regent of Europe is said to have his home and great occult center, using an ancient castle, said to have been built in a former life by him somewhere in the Middle Ages. He is a great ceremonialist, conducts powerful rituals, using human ceremonial orders as instruments for helping humanity and for training of aspirants to discipleship. Freemasonry, by the by, being one example. Perhaps I might go a little further with profound respect and mention that this great European adept is sometimes referred to with reverence as the Master, the Prince, and sometimes the Master, the Prince Rakoczy, referring to his family. He is, by the by, associated with the true but entirely mysterious personage known as the Comte de Saint-Germain. And may I just utter a word of warning here? Please be very careful in responding to certain claims about the outer presence of the Comte de Saint-Germain in the America at this time. However, friends, the location of the physical bodies of the adepts is quite unimportant, since their consciousness is free of the whole planet, and they're able to be aware without moving from their homes, whether physical or centers in the superphysical world. Their consciousness is free of the whole planet upon which they carry out their vitally important work. This, if I have time, may be described as to discover, attract, accept, and train disciples. Yes, as we'll see later in our studies, discipleship of an adept is a possibility today. Another vitally important part of their work is to quicken the evolution of their disciples, and through them that of humanity, to possess agents, outposts in the world of men through whom they can reach ourselves, humanity. And then they seek ever to recruit and give to the world initiates and further adepts possessed of these self-same powers, prepared to render to humanity the self-same but selfless services. And of course, yes, to ensure the continuance throughout the ages of the Great Brotherhood, its work and its available wisdom given to mankind. For the adepts are the discoverers and the keepers throughout the ages of the sacred light of spiritual and occult knowledge and wisdom. They're organized into a great brotherhood which is said to have its supreme head. The great brotherhood of the adepts, shepherds of souls, not far away, but very near to mankind, both in female and male bodies. May I describe or share with you descriptions of an adept? Wonderful description from theosophical literature. The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky, referring to a master of the wisdom. He stands like a white pillar to the west. From his face, the rising sun of thought eternally casts its first most glorious rays. His mind, like a becalmed and boundless ocean, spreadeth out in shoreless space. He holdeth life and death in his strong hand. And again, the light from the one Master, the one unfading, golden light of Spirit, poureth forth its effulgent beam upon the disciple from the very first. Meaning the aspirant to discipleship, I understand. The moment there is born in the heart of a human being the love for their fellow men, a deep compassion for the suffering, recorded day by day in our sources of news. The moment there is born that longing to help, to heal, to serve, and to guide, sincerely in the heart, the Master knows. And the light from the one Master poureth forth its effulgent beam upon the disciple from the very first. I have time, I think, for one or two more descriptions only. The Lord Buddha gave a wonderful description which has been translated into English verse by Sir Edward Arnold in The Light of Asia. Listen, friends, it's so wonderful. No need hath such to live as ye name life. He hath wrought the purpose through of what did make him man. Never shall yearnings torture him, nor sin stain him, nor ache of earthly joys or woes invade his safe eternal peace. He goes into nirvana. He is one with life, yet lives not. He is blessed, ceasing to be. Then comes the Sanskrit phrase, Om Mani Padme Om. And its meaning, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea. The Light of Asia and the description of the adept by the great Lord Buddha. There, friends, because of our system and of the passage of time, perhaps I might close this first part of my presentation of the idea, according to Theosophy, that adeptship is the goal of evolution for each and every one of us, and that there do exist on earth, can be found, can receive training from adept beings in physical bodies who would take as collaborates those who could become their dedicated disciples. Such, in very small part, is the hierarchy of the adepts of this our globe.